Cool. Well, Emma, should we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlie. Welcome, everyone. Really excited to see this great turnout for this last minute edition. Really excited to have all of you here. I'm also excited to follow along and learn some onX hacks. For those, I think I recognize almost everyone's name who is registered for this webinar, but for those that I haven't had a chance to put a face to name, I'm Emma Walker. I'm AIARE's curriculum manager. Really excited to be offering this webinar to you all again as part of our, this webinar to you as part of our second CE webinar series. We did one last year and had some great turnout for each of those. And Jason and Charlie did a webinar that was just aimed at the general public last year. So really excited to have them kind of do a deeper dive into integrating this navigation tool into the AIARE framework. So I'll give it over to Charlie and Jason here in just a second. But just wanted to let you know that there's some AIARE folks on the line, and I know Vicki Hormuth, our director, is here as well. And let you all know that this webinar is going to be recorded, and it will be posted on YouTube later. So if you're not able to stay the whole time, or if you have someone else who you think would like to learn a little bit more about how to use onX as part of the AIARE framework, you're welcome to share this with them. If you could go ahead and turn off your camera and mute your audio during the presentation, that will help things run a lot more smoothly since we'll have so many folks on the call. And then since this is a meeting, we'll be able to be a little more interactive at the end when there are questions. During the Q&A, you can either drop a question in the chat, or in Zoom, if you go down to the reactions button, you can raise your hand. And then Joe from onX or I can call on you and have you unmute and let us know what your question is. And Charlie and Jason or Joe or I, someone between all of these minds on the call, someone will hopefully be able to answer your question. And then we also, I know Charlie's going to mention this as well, but onX is really generously offering a 2-year subscription to onX Backcountry or onX Off-Road to all AIARE instructors. So to take advantage of that, you'll get an email from us in the next instructor update that will include the link in order to take advantage of that. It's also posted in the AIARE instructor and provider Facebook group. So you can go ahead and handle that now if you want to follow along, but otherwise that'll come out later this week. We're not going to mention the link in this, or drop the link in this meeting, because we're going to post it on YouTube. So it's only for AIARE instructors. With that, I think that's all my housekeeping that I wanted to get out of the way. So with that, I'm going to turn off my audio and camera and pass it over to Charlie and Jason. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. Excited to kind of go over the onX Backcountry product, and also have Jason kind of talk about how he uses it in his AIARE curriculums. I'm Charlie Avis. I'm the product manager for onX Backcountry. I live in Bozeman, Montana, love to ski, have taken a level 2 AIARE course, and but have been working with our team to kind of build out this product for the backcountry skier. And we love listening to the community and hearing from you guys, like what you need and how we can serve that. And Jason, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Charlie. Appreciate it. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It's great to be able to link up with a bunch of other mountain professionals and achieve a few goals. So the goal for tonight's webinar is to, number one, check that box for a little bit of AIARE CE. Number two, make sure you all leave this evening with a good sound understanding of how to use the onX tool. And then most importantly, I think the biggest goal here is how to actually integrate the AIARE framework into the onX Backcountry tool. And so that's what we have teed up. And Charlie and I are going to work together to facilitate about an hour max of programming as to how to use this thing and why it could benefit you in your own programming. Quick backstory on my relationship with onX. You know, I think like all of you as professionals, you probably have your order of operations. You probably have your navigational tools that you're used to, whether it's CalTopo, Gaia, Avenza, what have you. I was the same way. And I think one of the biggest headaches for me was just constantly going back and forth between different platforms. And I think after we wrap up tonight, you'll see how it can all be integrated into one or very few places, which is a huge benefit. And additionally, over the last 2 years, I've had a great opportunity to kind of get to work with the onX folks, and they have they're very passionate about helping outdoor educators and guides have access to the best product, and they've put a lot of energy into actually trying to figure out what's going to work best for us. And so hopefully you'll see that play out in real time as Charlie and I describe the feature. So Charlie, that's what I got for an intro. Let's go. Let's move on.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. So yeah, on the docket today, I'll do a quick overview of onX. Some of you may be familiar with onX, some of you may not. And then Jason will kind of do a little conversational, like using the product and kind of going through that, the AIARE framework and like how to plan tours. And Jason will kind of explain some of the tools that he uses for creating and organizing tour plans and setting up students with the right tools. And we'll do a Q&A section or session at the end, but please drop into the chat questions that you have as they come up. I think dropping in the chat is probably the most effective way, and raising your hand we'll kind of use at the end. But yeah, we'll try to address questions as you have them. So a little bit about onX. onX was founded in 2009 as a hunting product. Our founder, Eric, mapped or pulled together data sets for private and public land across all of North America and put it into a GPS chip. And then fast forward a couple of years, in 2016, we turned it into a mobile app. And that mobile app has been driving or been like the go-to tool, GPS mapping tool for hunters in North America for the last 8 years. In 2019, we took that core GPS mapping tool that we built with Hunt and expanded it to off-road, mapping off-roading trails and kind of still having those core features of like offline maps, private and public land, and other sort of useful mapping data for outdoor recreationalists. And then 2021, last year, we launched onX Backcountry, which is again taking this same core that we've built over almost a decade of working in the hunting and off-roading space, and applying it to the human-powered space. So backcountry skiing and then trail offerings in the summer. So onX Backcountry is what we're going to be talking about today. This is the product that we're using for to really like bring an offering to the backcountry skier. But also, if you're familiar with off-road or our off-roading product, like it has a very similar feature set, but more targeted towards snowmobilers. So there is this whole ecosystem that onX Backcountry exists within, but today we're going to talk about onX Backcountry. At a glance, yeah, we are a trail and a snow GPS mapping tool. We have tons of trails. We have 11 detailed ski guidebooks that we've brought into the app this year, offline maps with navigation, public land, and also just a suite of GPS tools for customizing customizing your view and sort of checking out like detailed bits of data like slope angle, slope aspect, weather conditions, and that kind of thing. So we're going to go into a ton of detail here. And real quick, just what makes us different, like Jason talked about a little bit, but some of the core tenets that we like to keep in mind, and maybe we'll reference a few times throughout the presentation, is onX is like reliability is really important to us. Like all of us are recreating deep in the backcountry, your tool's got to work. And we've got a long history to back that up. Usability, like we're trying to create a product that can be useful for guides and professionals like yourself, but also for your students. Content, like the content that we put into the map, whether it's trail content, guidebook content, we take a lot of care in curating that and trying to make sure that it's accurate or as accurate as possible. Privacy, which again is something we don't currently do, like crowdsourced data or anything like that. Like your data belongs to you. And ultimately, we're purpose driven. We work with groups like AIARE, and we're committed to supporting the avalanche forecasting, awareness, and research communities. And that means a lot to us. So with that, I'm going to jump into our product. Cool. So hopefully you can all see that. So this is onX Backcountry in a web map. We're also it's also a mobile app. We'll demo that later. I'll do a quick around the horn just to orient you, and then we'll dive into actually the meat of all this, which is how do you use it and how does Jason use it. So like I said, we're sort of a two-mode map. We've got snow mode and trail mode, and you'll see the map. We actually change certain aspects of the map based off of what mode you're in. The layers that you have available to you are also in this view. So in trail season, we have a bunch of layers for analyzing smoke and wildfire danger. And of course, in snow mode, more focused on analyzing terrain, avalanche forecasts, and stuff like that. We've got a suite of GPS tools as well. So you can create routes, you can drop waypoints, you can add photos to your map as points on the map. Sorry, I have to move everybody's view. There we go. We've got satellite and topo maps. So these kind of are the core drivers of each of sort of our base map view. You can see in snow mode, like with our aerial imagery, we actually switch it out with sort of winter images in the mountains, try to give people a better picture of what's going on there. We have full weather capabilities, so you can pull point forecasts on this web app and see weekly forecasts as well as hourly forecasts. I mentioned these tools up here on the right. All those get saved and you can organize them, and that's kind of what Jason will go into here at the end. You can define offline maps. Like I said, if you define areas and you can pull it offline, that's like a core part of this whole mapping tool, is that everything that you do, everything that you plan, then goes with you in the field. And finally, I mentioned, sorry, I have to turn that on to see this. I mentioned that we've been working with guidebook authors, and so we've got a whole interface for exploring guidebooks, which again, we'll go into more detail as we go. So with that, I'm going to clear out my map here. And so Jason, kind of turning it over to you, how do you use this tool? Where do you start? You're teaching an avalanche course. Yeah, walk us through your process.
Yeah, totally, Charlie. Thanks for giving us a quick around the horn. And I don't want to make too many assumptions, but I have to imagine that most of you have done a fair share of tour planning and mapping. So if this is overly fundamental, I apologize. And if it's the opposite, if you feel like you're totally lost in the weeds, let's set up some time to connect offline and make sure I get you all sorted out. As I said, I recognize at least half this list, and so I'd be more than happy to do what I can to make sure you have a clear understanding of how onX works. But let's start from scratch. And the goal of tonight, as I mentioned before, was when Emma from AIARE approached me, was how do you integrate the AIARE framework into onX? So opening up, number one, we have the planning phase, right? So we're going to go ahead and plan. And anytime we go out and plan a day in the backcountry, it all starts with, of course, the zone we're going to be operating in, but we got to start from scratch with weather and the avalanche forecast. And so let's just start with the avalanche forecast. My home operating zone is here in the Front Range. The bread and butter for me is usually Rocky Mountain National Park. And as what Charlie's doing here is he's zooming out. He just turned on the avalanche forecast function, and boom, you've got a beautiful red overlay right in the educational zone. So Charlie's going to go ahead and work his way into the forecast. You can do that by clicking on that screen. And it'll go ahead and eventually bring up the CIC bulletin. As you all know, when you're working with the students, and of course, I have my own method, you may have yours, but I'm going to break down the three major parts of the forecast. And number one, that's going to be the danger scale, right, at all elevations and aspects. And we can see there that we've got, again, that shade of red. So we've got today, we've got high NTL and ATL, and it's still considerable below tree line. So of course, we're doing a deeper dive with our students here, but we're going to go ahead and make note of that. Then we're going to move on to our problems. As Charlie scrolls down, he's going to see there that we're dealing with, of course, the P slab that started forming in October. And of course, this new snow has brought along a nice, delightful storm slab for us to deal with. In addition to that, I'm working with my students, of course, to find the summary. And we're going to go ahead and dissect the summary that the forecasters have given us. And we are going to implement that into our travel plan. Charlie, I think we've got the new website here. So let's see if we can find that. And again, for folks on the call, that's probably not new information for you all, but I usually start my day there. And one reason I like onX is because, like many of you, you probably have several tabs on your browser saved to many, many websites. For example, for me, it's going to be windy.com, NOAA Point Forecasts, Open Summit, the CIC Bulletin, Meteo Blue. The list goes on, as I'm sure it is for all of you. But the nice thing about onX is I can actually generate a few things. So Charlie, once we have our forecast, we've jotted that down in our blue book. We know what we're dealing with. We're going to go ahead and gather weather data. And so Charlie, if you can zoom into, let's say, the Bear Lake trailhead, if you can find that sucker. That's going to be kind of our jumping off point for this webinar. Charlie's right there. So before Charlie clicks on that snowflake, which is actually a great source of information, I'm going to go ahead and generate a point forecast. Charlie, why don't you aim for the IAIARE zone? So Charlie, if you noticed, he's clicked on his screen and there's a crosshair. He's going to drag it over to Lake IAIARE, and that's actually going to pull data to generate a point forecast for that elevation band. And of course, we're always looking for different bits of info, but for my students, we start with the basics, right? It's going to be a high and a low. It's nice to have a little bit of a feels like for outerwear planning. And then of course, you see on the screen there, we're looking at our wind speeds. So we've got westerly wind at 18 miles per hour. We have our current precip, which are the biggies for students. And of course, for tour planning, we have our sunrise and sunset right there. And there's a lot of information here, which is something I've seen onX implement over the last year. So I really don't have to go to several different sites. I can see right here, precip from the last week. I've got an hourly. So I've got a lot of data right here, more than enough for your standard AIARE 1 student, and more than enough for me for most days of getting out in the field. So as I said, this is a great resource, but if you want to take it a step further, Charlie can go ahead and click on that snowflake, which is actually going to be a SNOTEL site. And so if there wasn't any weather information that we were able to gather with that point forecast, we can go ahead and click on the SNOTEL right there, SNOTEL 322 out of Bear Lake. And this is going to go ahead and give us our height of snow, our storm snow. We've got SWE here, temps, and it's also going to give us our history, the last 7 days. And so again, we've all been gathering this data as avalanche educators and as guides. But for me, it's been fantastic that it's all really aggregated in one spot. And so it just makes, not only does it make my job easier, as I'm relaying this to my students, they only have to go to one site, right? They just need to know one site to go to, and all of a sudden they have not only a resource for tour planning, but they've got their weather and they've got the avalanche bulletin right there at their disposal, which is really important, as I'm sure you all know. So again, we're still in the plan phase. We've got our our avalanche forecast. We've got our weather forecast. We can do quite a deep dive on that, depending on how much info we actually need. And then typically, and for me, in a 3-day avalanche AIARE program, on day one, we do a very, very, very short field tour, get out, move the legs a little bit, cover some information in the outdoor classroom. But now I want to dive into what I typically do on a day 2. And so for me, a day 2 is very often an instructor-led tour. And so I've already populated a very basic tour plan. And so you'll see that Charlie just clicked on my content, and I actually shared this with him. And so there's a folder that I have preset. This is something that I've built out. I built this out for this evening, but you can build it out for any of the zones you work in and have them ready to go. And so I went ahead and just shared this with Charlie as if he was, say, one of my students. Charlie gets that via a link or a QR code or just text or airdrop, whatever's easiest. And then Charlie, right now you can see on the left are all the waypoints that I have. And Charlie, stay right there. For you AIARE instructors, you're going to notice some themes in the naming convention there. And that's simply we've jumped right into ride safely. And so you're going to see the 4 major things there. We've got monitoring conditions along our route, checking in with the group, recognizing avalanche terrain, and of course, using terrain to reduce our risk. And I know for me, it's so important to drive home to folks as we're touring to stop and go through this 4-point checklist over and over and over along the tour. And so what I've done is I've laid it out for them. So Charlie, if you go ahead and just unhide everything, or sorry, yeah, make everything visible to everyone out there. Let's see. Great. So for me, here's a pretty basic full day instructor-led tour. So we've got the blue line there is going to be kind of our primary objective. And for those of you not familiar with the zone, you see the lake in the top right corner of the screen. That's Bear Lake. That's kind of that's where the trailhead is. And you'll notice that this tour, the blue line, works its way southwest all the way to a polygon above Lake Hiaha. And for those of us familiar with the area, that's the hippie trees. That's easy alleys. That's kind of low angle skiing that faces north-northeast. It is a pretty good objective for an Area 1 instructor-led tour. One thing you'll notice is every single one of those red points is going to be part of that ride safely checklist, right? This is what we're trying to drive home with our students. We're trying to make the decision-making process as objective as possible. So Charlie, let's go ahead and go all the way to the trailhead. Nice. And what Charlie's doing is he's flipping us around in 3D mode. So if you hold the control button, it allows you to move around and get a different view. And this is something we'll dive into a little deeper once we get to the student-led tour. So starting right here, Charlie's at the trail. He's going to go ahead and click on that first red box. And boom, first thing's checking with the group. So right here, I just made some notes for myself. And again, this is something you can do to build for your own memory. Potentially as an area course leader, this might be something that you build out so you can share it with your instructors. And of course, this is something you can share with your students so they can actually see kind of what the thought process is and what you want them to be thinking about as they participate in this tour with you. So starting at the trailhead, we're going to go ahead and kick things off with our departure and transceiver check. We're going to reiterate our mindset for the day. What gives us confidence to carry out this plan, and what are our goals and objectives. We're going to go ahead and follow that blue line. And again, boom, we're going to hit another one of those ride safely checkpoints, recognize avalanche terrain. This one's here because the slope to the left, Charlie, if you could flip on slope shading temporarily. It's quite steep in that zone up in the trees. And so this is a spot where I'm entering a zone that's red, right? So it's north of 30 degrees. Often on day 2, we've discussed that, once you hit that 30-degree mark, it's time to start making decisions. And this is usually where I kick it off, right? Hey, let's bust out those slope meters and figure out whether or not this is safe terrain. Charlie, go ahead and turn on or flip us over to satellite imagery, just to give folks out there a little bit of an understanding of this terrain. It's very, very, very dense treed terrain here. So it's a great opportunity for conversation as far as whether or not we are an avalanche terrain. So I often stop there, checking with the group in the skin track, and then I move forward. Charlie, you can go ahead and keep slope shading on, but go ahead and turn us back over to the topo. So as we're touring along, we get up to Nymph Lake, which is that first lake. And Charlie, you can go ahead and click on my next ride safely checkpoint there. Nice. So moderate conditions along the route. Usually by this time in the tour, people have had a chance to move. They've had a chance to poke the snow a little bit. I've obviously encouraged them to kind of step off the skin track and feel the snow under their own skis or on foot or snowshoes or whatever modality they're in. And then this is actually a good point to see some terrains. This is the first point in our tour where we've actually busted up above kind of the trees that are blocking our view. Charlie, I'm not 100% sure what we're going to see, but if you want to flip us into satellite mode, we might be able to see the dragon tail from here. And that's going to be north of us. So from here, that's great. Yeah, right there. So from here, it's kind of our first chance. Oh my gosh, boom, here's this huge view. We get a chance to talk as a team about simple, challenging, complex terrain. And this is the spot where I just kind of check in with everybody. How are they feeling? Are we seeing anything? Have we witnessed any red flags? As it is in that screen right there, there's also a piece of terrain that we have great views of, which is to the left. There's that polygon, which is an area known as, yep, right there, Charlie, known as the terrain park. And so this is a part where we're monitoring conditions, and I've encouraged everybody to assess what the forecast was and compare it to the nowcast. Great, Charlie. If you want to flip us back to topo mode temporarily, and we'll continue on our virtual tour. Nice. And Charlie, yeah, perfect. And so we're going to continue along, keep moving. Right now, there hasn't been too many tough decisions. Yep, Charlie hit that one. Again, there's that red patch to our right of the skin track. And this is a part where I often work with students to, understand slope angle and also employ different group management techniques and using terrain to reduce our risk. So we're going to tour up on that blue line, and we're going to get to that next junction. And again, this is a spot where we're going to check in with a group. So we've just busted up above the trees. It's time to make sure we're still feeling good with the plan. This is a great place to have some review about simple, challenging, and complex terrain with impeccable views, and we'll continue on. Charlie brings us to this next point, and it starts to get steep here, as you can see. And so this is a part where we really, I encourage all my students to give some insight, have an opinion, and determine what sort of terrain are we about to travel into.
And
cool.
Jason, can you tell us a little bit about, like, how do your students like to have, like, do your students have this tool? Are they looking at slope angle stuff with you when you're in the field? Like, talk a little bit how your students are working kind of with this information as well. Yeah,
Charlie, great question. So everyone in this room has had experience with this, I'm certain. But tour planning can be often a rabbit hole, right? We could do this forever with folks. And so the goal is to make this as easy as possible. And so what happens is I make sure all the students have this map on their phone, and they simply just click offline mode and can select this whole zone, and it downloads quickly. And then also updates if I were to make any changes to it while I'm online. And so I'm encouraging students to follow along using the blue dot on their app, and they can actually see where we are in real time. They can see those checkpoints as we're approaching them. And they can also, of course, see what we're seeing on the screen here. So yeah, Charlie, great question. I'm always encouraging my students to be an active participant in the decision-making process, as I'm sure you all are as well. But sometimes, it can be a struggle to make sure they bring out their tools, whether that be their phone for navigation or a slope meter, things like that. So yeah, I'm encouraging them to be an active participant in this process. Awesome. So as we come along this tour, we're going to hit that next one. And again, you all are getting the hang of this. We're just hammering through the ride safely checkpoint. And we don't need to read through every single one of these. But this next one we get to right above the terrain park. These are all just points that I know in the tour are going to require some sort of decision-making and are going to require one of those 4 steps in the ride safely framework. So as our students go all the way to Lake Hiaha, again, I won't spend too much time here because this I know is not the first time you all have done some sort of tour planning. We're going to go through that checks and balance process all the way to the top of that polygon, which is the hippie trees. There's a snow pit up there that I know is sheltered, and sometimes I actually log things in there. You see notes there from last season. I have the height of snow is 160 there, but I'll often just like keep notes running in other snow pits. So I have like a working memory because it'll just stay there in the notes section. And so season after season, you can actually track obs from different snow pits, and they'll just update. You don't have to re-upload them to the app. They'll just stay right there. So if I'm in the field, I can look at that and I will have intel from a previous snow pit. And so let's go ahead and rip skins. We're going to flip around and work our way all the way out. Like I said, for the sake of time, we don't need to read through every single one of these, but I do build them in to encourage the students to really be mindful of using the tool to guide their tour. There's a bunch of other lines on there. I won't get into too much detail, but those are optional routes, right? So we obviously have a plan A, but I also have a B, a C, and a D, right? Different options for folks to follow, different bits of ski terrain, because of course, the goal of the instructor-led tour is to give my students all the tools I need to have a very successful day 3, which for many of my AIARE programs is going to be the student-led tour. So big things here, just as far as just like reading the map. Of course, Charlie has slope shading. He's turned that on and off. One thing that's pretty cool here. So Charlie, we've got our slope shading. I don't think that's anything too new to most avalanche instructors. Let's go ahead and flip those off and turn on the aspect. So the slope aspect function is pretty neat, right? It allows us to kind of explore new venues from the comfort of our warm basements, right? And try to visualize what sort of terrain we're going to be getting in and how it's going to be affected by the avalanche forecast and the weather we're seeing, right? So this is just allowing me to see exactly what slopes are going to be affected. And of course, the good part, what's going to provide the best snow given the forecast. So those are some of the big basic features I use. Again, I might flip around for density. So I did it once earlier, but Charlie, if you want to flip us back into satellite imagery. Nice. And you can actually zoom in on that purple line right where your cursor is. That's a zone in Rocky Mountain National Park called the Olympic Games. And it can be kind of tricky to get through there. And so, of course, satellite imagery is going to allow me to see kind of fall line skiing, the aspect, and of course, where it's most dense and where I can actually get through there, because that can be a tricky bit of terrain to navigate, not only from a steepness, but tree density. So Charlie, those are kind of the biggies. Are there anything else as far as like general understanding before we map out a tour from scratch that you were hoping I would address?
I think that let's go into mapping out a tour from scratch, like going into day 3 as a student, because I mean, one thing is obviously Jason put in work using these tools to build out this plan, and is using sort of the capabilities here to organize it into folders and share and all that stuff. So I think if we dive into the day 3, how a student would plan a tour, you'll get a sense of how that all works. So yeah, Jason, let's move on to day 3.
Cool. So of course, we're going to make it our way all the way back to Bear Lake. We're going to debrief like champions, and we're going to get back to the classroom. And I am going to tee them up with a homework assignment. And that homework assignment for most of my AIARE 1 programs on the day 3 is, of course, to go ahead and be the sharp end of the spear and put a tour together and own it and lead the charge. And so I might give them some very, very basic guardrails, right? Some very basic boundaries. This is going to be different based on the students. Some might need more guardrails than others, but here would be a pretty basic layout. I may say something like, hey, we were here yesterday and you know the trailhead. The zone is just to the north. And basically I want you to start at the trailhead, and I want you to work your way up to the north and northeast slopes of Flat Top Mountain, which are where those polygons are. If anyone's familiar with, the Front Range of Colorado, you've probably skied here. So it's not anything particularly tricky or confusing. It has great terrain where you can access here from established trails. But I would encourage my students to put together a tour plan, and that tour plan at the very basic is gonna be our route of ascent, our route of descent. I would strongly encourage them to identify hazards, and hopefully I did a good job modeling the day prior, and I would really make sure that they were able to facilitate a good ride safely protocol as we skied up to up and down the north slopes of Flat Top, right? So I want them making sure I know when they're monitoring conditions. I want them to identify when they're checking with their group, when they're recognizing avalanche terrain, and how can we use terrain to reduce our risk. And I often will stop students every hour or two and ask them to grade themselves on how well they are riding safely. And usually if I'm not really speaking up, they're usually giving themselves like a C or C plus by 11 a.m. and hopefully it's like an A plus by the time they get back to the trailhead. And so let's jump into tour planning here. So as you can see on the left, I've only identified one waypoint, which is the trailhead, and 2 areas for folks that are familiar with like CalTopo and other digital mapping. That's what we call polygons, right? So that's all it is, just a polygon. I gave them some really rough outlines of where to go. And let's go ahead and turn on slope shading, Charlie. Cool. So this is a big tool. Hopefully my students are familiar with that, because that's really going to guide a lot of their decision making. As you can see, Charlie, why don't you flip us real quick into 3D mode? Let's take a little flyby of that big zone, which, if folks are not from here, that's the banana bowls. It's a big, wide open zone. So the first thing I might do before I start inking up this map is just get a look at things. Okay, how steep is this? What's going to be the best course of action? Is it going to be to approach from above or below, right? Those are going to be things I'm hoping my students are thinking through. And of course, Charlie takes the next step. It's like, okay, how dense are the trees? What sort of rocky terrain are we dealing with? Do I need to go bottom up or top down on this thing? And so for most of my students, I would encourage them to be able to get eyes on their objectives as they're approaching it. So I might deter them from going top down their first time there. So I would encourage them to have multiple routes, an A and a B. But Charlie, let's go ahead and just start with a plan A. Let's get us from the Bear Lake trailhead to the base of the banana bowls, which is going to be that bigger polygon. And I'm going to encourage Charlie to do it the fastest way possible, which is going to be to go ahead and just follow that traditional trail all the way to the base of the banana bowl. So Charlie, can you go ahead and put a line on there for me?
Yeah, and just so everyone's following along too, I'm using these tools up here. I just click the add route tool. And so if I start that at the trailhead, it'll just snap me along this trail. And yeah, I think I'll follow this trail up. Maybe there's a little steep spot there that I'll want to drop a waypoint on in a bit, but let's get to the base of this first. Or Jason, should we go all the way to our
yeah, I want to go all the way there, because what we can do there, so Charlie, why don't you go ahead and just label that, route A, banana bowls. Yep. Or actually, go name it up track. Great. And so when Charlie saves that, it's going to give us an understanding of distance and elevation, right? So we can kind of see there the elevation profile to the left, and that will give me a chance to kind of start assessing my time plan. And so now, Charlie, I want you to do a visual walkthrough, maybe zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to want to encourage my students to add waypoints to any significant juncture. So actually go way out. So if you're not familiar with this zone, your hackles might stand up a bit, just on the summer trail. Yeah, so zoom in at that switchback. Cool. So as you can see, it kind of crosses through some red terrain. Any of us are familiar with that know that it's pretty much a non-issue, but it'd be tough to tell if it was your first time there. So Charlie, let's go ahead and drop a waypoint there. And let's go ahead and just label it, slope angle ? Because I know if I had not been here and I'm an Area 1 student, that's pretty bright red. And like I said, I know the terrain is pretty mellow there, but if it's my first time, I might not. So I want to make sure that I'm going through that ride safely checklist. And I'm going to go ahead and make a note, and I'm going to want to be tipped off as I'm taking this tour in real time using my map. So as I'm skiing along, I'm going to see that red hazard, and I'm going to be able to stop in my group and address this. Great. Nice, Charlie. So we can go ahead and ski along. Let's just say we took a slope angle. We looked at the terrain. We decided it was not a threat. It's very self-facing. It's all melted off. And actually, don't go too far. But there's going to be a junction. There's a trail junction there for the flat top trail. I might put something there, check in with the group. So go ahead and throw another waypoint real quick. So Charlie's hitting the waypoint button. He's going to drag and drop. He's going to label it group check-in. Yep. And maybe in the notes, just like something simple, check in with the group. How's everybody feeling? Energy levels, those are things we're going to want to decide. This is also our last chance to determine if we're going to continue going from ground up or top down. Excellent. Cool. And so now Charlie's going to continue along that track, which so far we like it. And I might have him stop at the base of the rock garden, that first zone. And same thing, let's go ahead and monitor conditions along our route. So Charlie's gonna make another waypoint. Yeah, right there, excellent. So I'm gonna wanna make note of that, because I'm not gonna know without seeing on my map that that's the exit for a potential ski zone. So I definitely want to take a time to stop there and check it out while I know I'm right underneath that zone. So I'm going to gather intel. I'm going to compare the forecast with the nowcast. I'm going to take note of the terrain I see above me in real time. And I'm going to go ahead and continue on to the Manables. Nice. So now we're at the base of the Manables. I might drop another waypoint here. And again, totally up to you as educators, how often you're dropping waypoints. But the goal for me is to really encourage my students to constantly be using the AIARE framework to make decisions. And for me, it's better to do more than less of that. And so I might model a lot of that throughout the day. And then I'm going to encourage them to make decisions. One thing I found is if I see us having too much conversation where it's not really going anywhere, I'm going to encourage them to check their tools, right? Because everything about traveling the backcountry is finding ways to lower our uncertainty. And our way of doing that is to lean on our skills and our tools to be able to do that. And right now, we have two tools right here that we can use. Number one is going to be the AIARE framework, and the other is going to be objective metrics and mapping tools that we have at our disposal, literally at our fingertips. And so if we can go ahead and implement those things ahead of time, we can lean on them while we're in the field, and we can take subjectivity out of it. And so, Charlie, let's go ahead to the base of the Manables, right where our route kind of ends. Let's put one more waypoint there. Let's go ahead and recognize avalanche terrain. So label that recognize avalanche terrain. Our goal here is to look in real time and see what the best path is. But because we're tour planning the night before, we're going to go ahead and use some of this slope shading here to try to find the most mellow way up this piece of terrain. And so, Charlie, we've got a lot of options here, but why don't you cut us into the up kind of straight up the hill there. You can put a nice little ski track. Perfect. Now head down screen a little bit, just getting above that red section, and we're just piecing together good bits of terrain, kind of keeping things at as low angle as we can. Nice. Charlie, why don't you go ahead and throw on the satellite imagery too to make sure we're not getting too much into the trees. It does start to get dense down screen. Sorry, I'm making you multitask, Charlie. Nice. Yeah, you all get the idea. So we're kind of skirting those trees. We'll work our way up to the top of a potential transition point. Love it, Charlie. I think that's great. And let's just go ahead and label that, Banana Bowl skin track. Great. I'm going to go ahead and drop another waypoint up top, and I'm going to label it something like transition. And in the notes, I'm going to go ahead and say, like, how are we going to ski this? Kind of group strategy, things like that. Things to remind myself, like, what are the next steps are to get down safely. Nice. Cool. And again, it depends how deep you want to go here. You could leave it as is and just deal with it in real time. You now have a polygon that's guided you. You've now made your way to the top in a relatively safe virtual manner. And now you got to get down. Like I said, you can either label it or not. We don't necessarily need to label it at this point, but you could draw a line. You could also put waypoints in some areas that might present some sort of a hazard, whether it be some of those convex rollers we see via slope shading. Yeah, Charlie, you might stick one over there and just label it like convex roller ? Anytime I see kind of a red section, it lets me kind of keep eyes on things, whether or not it's a whiteout or I can see it. Just so it's going to remind me and remind an AIARE 1 student to be mindful of that as we're descending. You might have sections on here like, regroup with the team, or maybe we're going to group ski this all the way to the bottom, but I would leave it up to them and coach them through it. So now this is pretty basic. If you decided to descend or exit a different way, we could certainly draw that the same way Charlie showed you how to draw it the first time. If you wanted to tack on additional terrain, we could actually try to find our way to the top of the rock garden in a more adventurous method. And Charlie, if you want, you're welcome to do that. Or we could go all the way back to the black up track, and we could work our way up from the trail up. So we've got options as far as how deep the tour goes. I think for an AIARE 1 student, this starts to be around what I think would be appropriate, like not too much, not too little. We've got a safe ascent, a safe exit, and we've got our objectives. And so when my students leave after day 2, I want them to be able to know how to read a map, or read a digital map like this, right? And that's going to be, how do they orient themselves? How do they know what elevation band they are, and how does that compare to the map? How do they know what aspect they're going to be skiing, and how does that correlate to the avalanche bulletin, right? So those are the big takeaways. As far as them having ownership in the mountains with me on the day 3, I want them to be able to comfortably rely on a mapping tool. And again, we're here to talk about onX, but they just need to be able to navigate. And for them, that means they've got some sort of a game plan. They've identified hazards, and they're able to use the AIARE framework and integrate that into their game plan. And they have a tool, task list, to remind them to make good decisions and actually have a discussion along the way. Charlie, what am I leaving out here?
Yeah, and while you were explaining that, I added all of this into a folder. So then you have like a single, that tour plan gets consolidated, and just like Jason did with me, he can then share it with tour partners or with your students. And so again, trying to like that sort of idea of organizing it all into a comprehensive tour plan. Jason, I'm gonna, if I may, I'll also add, like, onX actually has a couple of features as well that, at least from the student's perspective, in terms of like setting the students up with the right tools, we have a few features that like actually also make this a lot easier for them too, which I think that using the slope angle and kind of the markup tools here and going through this AIARE process is like obviously super important for learning how to travel in the backcountry. But we also have, like I mentioned earlier, been working with Guidebook authors, and so we actually have this entire zone mapped in onX using content that we partnered with Beacon Guidebooks for. So if you, as a student, we can actually give them the tools to say, like, cool, like, go to the Rocky Mountain Zone or National Park. We'll go to Chaos Canyon or the Banana. What was the zone over here that we were in?
Yeah, that's going to be the Otis Flat Top zone.
Otis Flat Top. Let's find that here, which maybe is called Flat Top. Oh, maybe it has a different name. Well, you can find your zone.
Yeah, hit Odessa, Charlie. I think it might be tied into the Odessa. You're just scroll back, keep going. Right there.
There we go.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So then you can see in this zone, we've got like descriptions of the zone, sort of a general avalanche terrain exposure scale rating of the zone, as well as a list of all the descents in that zone. And again, this is where we can find Banana Bowl, and we can get a description of Banana Bowl from the guidebook. So it's something that as your students go out into the world, we hope that this guidebook then becomes a way that they can continue to explore, but have information to be able to apply the framework as well.
Yeah, Charlie, I'd agree. I mean, I almost feel spoiled, right? Because often as avalanche educators, I'm sure all of us on this call have like a living document of resources, and it probably involves, guidebooks like these and maps and Powder Project. But now I can just literally say, like, hey, the guidebook that I was going to recommend to you, if you're coming on an AIARE course with me and Rocky, it's already there. And so it just kind of, for a newer student, it expedites the process. Sure, it's no substitute for being able to identify terrain without outside influence, but it's a great tool to set folks up for a way to find routes after they leave the guidance of an AIARE 1 program.
Absolutely. And Jason, I'm going to switch real quick over to our mobile device, because everything that we just built, that whole tour plan, is now synced into my mobile device. So you can see that folder I created, Banana Bowl Tour Plan, all of the points that I marked, and it's on the map. One question I saw come in through the chat was, was about what is the difference between the features in the mobile phone versus web map. So I think, and with a specific call out on 3D. So 3D is a little bit more fully featured in web map as well, but you can kind of flip into 3D mode here. The main thing is that there's some limitations on what layers can be on when in 3D mode, but you still get that here. So that's one difference. And then the other is, if you remember the Snap to Trail route builder tools, those aren't in the mobile device yet as well, but you can still draw lines and get elevation, gain, distance, and all that stuff from them. And then finally, to kind of finish our tour planning, creating an offline map is as simple as defining a new map, making sure it seems like it's a little bit lagged, so I'm going to try to not move too fast here. Choosing your resolution, often choose the highest resolution. You can name it. Where are we, Jason? Bear Lake.
Yep.
And hit save. And so now every single layer that we have in our map here, so slope angle, slope aspect, topo, satellite, all of that stuff gets downloaded offline. We don't force somebody to choose which layers they take offline. It all goes along with the avalanche forecast. However, that avalanche forecast will expire after 24 hours or whenever its expiration date is. So if you're doing a hut trip, it'll expire as well. But so that kind of completes the whole as a student, as Jason's student today, that would sort of at least within the tool complete like sort of a tour plan, and we're ready to go put skins on and walk out into the field.
Yep, agreed, Charlie. Yeah, I mean, like I said, for those of us who really like to geek out on nav apps and mapping, I mean, you can get really deep with this stuff, but I think from an AIARE perspective, onX does provide a way to kind of keep everything in one place. Like, for example, they just download it. They don't have to download all of the layers individually, as Charlie said, which is kind of a huge bonus, right? Because we've all had students that forgot to download and they don't have access to it once we lose cell service. And so I think it's just great that it's all in one spot. And I found it to be a pretty simple way to get information of our tour plan in the hands of my students.
Awesome. And with that, we've got a list of questions that came through in the chat. So Jason and I will tackle these. So thank you Jason, for walking us through your process. That was awesome. All right. Oh dear, now I've lost the chat.
And as Charlie's working through this, I know Charlie has a hard stop. I just want to reiterate, like, everyone on this list, if you're really confused or having trouble, like, just reach out to me. I'll happily talk you through how to troubleshoot some of this if it doesn't end up being really straightforward.
Absolutely. And same for us here at onX. We have a great CS team. They're always willing to take questions. Cool. So the first question we got from Dan was, what resolution DEM is utilized on the slope angle shading? So the data sets that we're using to generate slope angle range from 3 to 10 meter resolution, depending on the area. And we're actively working to pull in higher resolution DMs as they're available, and they're becoming increasingly more available. And there is a lot of discussion around, like, in representing slope angle shading, what is the right resolution for that? Because if you go too fine a resolution, then you actually lose some of the patterns across whole slope, but you do capture micro terrain. Whereas if you increase your interval, you get a better sort of overall understanding of the slope, but maybe miss micro terrain features. So that's something that we're sort of actively working on the best solution for. From Charlie R, question about where the weather daily forecasts come from. They do come from Weather Underground, and I fortunately can't answer the question of what the exact model is that is used. But it has been, through my own experience, like, relatively comparable to, or it's a pretty good model, it seems, comparable to other sources as well, but I can't speak to the specific one. Question from David, does onX have an hourly sun exposure overlay? We don't, we have that slope aspect layer, and I think that aspect layer can be used to interpret that, but it's actually a good idea. I know that CalTopo has a feature that's similar to that. That's something that we've been thinking about. From John, what, if any, features are available on a computer that are not accessible on a phone? I think I answered that. We try very hard to keep parity between all the platforms so that you're not guessing what works and what doesn't. But there are a few things here or there that are different. But in terms of all the layers and the data that we have on the map and your ability to like create things in web and see them on mobile, that's all very synced. And finally, a question from Aaron. Is there a public-private land layer available in onX Backcountry app? Great question. So there actually is a public land available here. If I can show quickly by zooming out. Oh, I have to clear some stuff up here. Oops. But you can see actually that our public land layer is on the map here. So like these green polygons here are national forest, and you can click on them and see it's the national forest. Same with wilderness and national parks. So we have public land available in the app, and private land we're going to have early next year as well. But our sister apps on our hunt and off-road do have private land, and we're bringing that into Backcountry as well. Awesome. A question around airdropping tour plans. That's a super good question. And it's actually something that we're actively working on right now. So you can export GPX files and airdrop those. So it's a bit of a workaround around some of this kind of online sharing function that we showed here. But if you have a skin track like this from your mobile device, you can export it and airdrop it to your partner, who can then import it right into onX. Cool. Question from Charlie R about, are the uphill skin tracks crowdsourced? And the answer, and I think just to throw a visual on what you're probably talking about here, which would be these up tracks here. The answer is no, they're not crowdsourced. They're at least in this area in particular, like where we've worked with Guidebook authors, they are the lines like that given to us by Guidebook authors. There are some cases where we pull in other sources, but we try to vet those pretty carefully. Cool, and I'll take two more questions. It looks like we got a lot coming in. I'll try to take, just being respectful of everyone's time, a couple more here. Question from Sarah is interested if there's weather stations available besides Snowtel. So currently for that kind of, that view that Jason showed, where'd my Snowtels go? There's one. This view, this is limited to Snowtel stations now, but but we have looked at ways of expanding that, but currently it's just Snowtel stations. And then a question from Mia, how do you import tracks? So good question. So everything that we showed here was kind of about using native tools to build it out. But from my content, this view where you're keeping track of all your stuff, you can import KML or GPX files right into the app. And you can also do the same on mobile, or you can open GPX files that were sent to you in onX Backcountry. And then for export, same question. If you go into, say, your tracks that you want to export, or you can select your track and hit export right here out of the action ellipses.
Or share it.
Or share it. Yeah, because export will turn it into a GPX, but sharing it will actually allow you to send this link to somebody or turn it into a QR code, like Jason has said, and then the person who's receiving it doesn't have to know how to import it or anything else, or even if they don't have the app, it'll prompt them to download the app and then be able to see it. So this sort of native share is actually a much easier way to get your tour plan to somebody, especially if they've got, if you're online and they have Backcountry. Cool.
And then Charlie, I know you've got a hard stop now, but we can, I can make sure we record all of these questions, and I can have you and or Joe answer them like in email format, and then we can send that around to folks who are on this, who registered for the webinar.
Yeah, that would be great. There's a ton of great questions here, and I would love to answer all of them. But yeah, that would be great, Emma, if you could even share my email address with this group, whatever's necessary. Happy to answer questions.
Yeah, when I send the recording link around, why don't I just go ahead and copy you, Charlie, and you too, Jason, if that's okay. And then I'll BCC everybody else, but if I copy you all, then folks can reach out to you directly if they have questions.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Sweet. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for just a second. I know we have a few more questions, but I think they're probably mostly looks like mostly the kind of questions that probably Charlie's best positioned to answer. So please know that if you can continue to drop questions in the chat, but please feel free to keep doing that while I'm talking for now, or email me your questions and I can make sure we get those to Charlie as well. But let me just share my screen because I just wanted to do a little bit more housekeeping, if you all don't mind. Awesome.
And thank you, everyone. I do need to drop off, but Jason, thanks so much for walking us through your process, and hope everyone has a great, safe, snowy winter.
Thanks, Charlie. See you later.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, so we have a couple other upcoming webinars. You all know how to register for AIARE webinars, clearly because you found yourselves here, but we do have a couple more coming up, and we are actually going to add one more in January. If you're registered for the whole series, it's going to be an add-on, so it is another paid webinar, but if you're already registered for these 4 webinars, you get this 5th one as a bonus, and I will send out an email to folks about that later this week. We're just waiting to confirm a couple more details. We do have these 2 upcoming webinars. One next week with Ian Nicholson. He's going to talk about teaching the North American Danger Scale. And then the other is in January, and that's a panel that I'm personally really excited to host with 2 AIARE instructors and 1 PhD researcher who's doing some really interesting work around gender dynamics, which is a topic of great interest to me. So really pumped to host that one. Would love to see any and all of you there. And of course, as always, if you go to avtraining.org and check out the AIARE Instructor CE page, you can register for any of those webinars. And then the last thing I wanted to ask folks is to please give us your feedback, because we rely on you in order to make these webinars like what you want to see from us. So if you scan this QR code, you should be able to, you'll be taken to a Google form. If you don't mind doing that like tonight, before you drop off or as you're getting ready to drop off, I would super appreciate it. As you all know, when you ask your students for feedback at the end of courses, if they don't do it before they go home, they're way less likely to do it. So that's why I ask folks to handle it tonight. So I'm going to leave this up until we all drop off, but wanted to just say thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Charlie and Jason and Joe. Thanks, Joe, for being tech support and answering a bunch of questions in the chat as they came up. Really excited to have this team together. And yeah, really excited for all the AIARE instructors who showed up. We had a great turnout tonight, and I'm really excited to see all your names here. Really appreciate you all showing up to continue your education and hone your craft as educators. It's really exciting to see and is a really cool part of my job. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, feel free to drop any other questions in the chat. I'm going to just go ahead and I'll mute and turn my camera off so I'm not slowing things down with my really slow Anchorage internet up here. But Feel free to message me if you have other questions that you want to make sure that Charlie and or Jason answer. And in the meantime, hope everybody has a happy and safe start to your season, and we will see you all soon.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Jason.